Hi, my name's Caroline Beckett. I'm Vicar of Brightlingsea and I'm currently in my living room.
My name's Andy Griffiths. I coordinate training for the Diocese of Chelmsford, and I'm here on the side of my bed.
And my name's Elizabeth Snowden. I'm the Archdeacon of Chelmsford, and I'm currently sat at my desk.
And together we are at a distance, rethinking Christian leadership. So this is episode 8 in a series of conversations about Christian leadership as community organising in a pandemic.
And we've examined what community organising is and said that, among other things, it's a 5-fold process.
Over the last 4 episodes, we've looked at the first 2 stages of that process, which are organising and listening.
And in our next episode, we'll be going on to stage 3, which is planning.
But in this episode, we're taking a bit of a break from that process because we have a special guest. Archdeacon Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to have you here. How's your life looking in COVID-19?
Well, in many ways, it's quite strange because instead of being out and about, visiting churches, going to meetings with loads of people, I'm working remotely, sat at my desk. However, I'm still in meetings and still in contact with people. And in these strange times, I've been so encouraged by what I've seen and heard of parishes, churches, priests doing to connect with the most vulnerable in our society. And that's brought me a lot of encouragement and joy. And I'm also encouraged by the way in which people are exploring different ways to worship together.
So Andy, you've had a busy week, haven't you? Tell us about Monday.
Okay, so Monday evening, we had a big Zoom meeting with the Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. So Citizens Essex had done a big listening campaign. We'd had 1,000 conversations across Essex about safety, and we were able to tell the Commissioner all about those. Asked for 3 specific things for him to move on, and he responded really well, and he's committed to working with us, and he's now pursuing us for ongoing meetings with the Citizens Alliance. And I guess what we were doing was what citizens chapters, groups of organisations across the country do all the time, but that was both the first campaign that Essex citizens did and the first campaign in the UK to be conducted electronically and online like that. And personally, I was trying to chair it, and about halfway through the Virgin Media out happened, so I couldn't get back on, and somebody else stepped in beautifully and chaired in my place for a bit, and then by the end of the meeting I was back in. It was really stressful, but it's worth doing. And anyone who's listening to us and thinking, all of that campaigning stuff has to be on hold for the time being, it really doesn't, because there are tools to make it happen. And so far, over 1,000 people have watched on Facebook Live or Facebook more recently how that assembly went.
And it was wonderful as well how all our different organisations managed to be represented, even if we couldn't all get our Zoom backgrounds to match our organisations. And actually, despite the dropping in and out of a number of participants with tech issues, it worked remarkably well. And it's amazing how warmly people can respond when you make an effort and you listen and you get involved. We've been sent a number of questions, speaking of getting involved, and we're going to try and answer some of them. Some will hold over for another occasion, but we're going to try and answer a few. And the first is from Pete Rogers in Nottingham, who asks, is there a link between community organising and numerical growth for churches? Now, Andy and I have a lot to say about evangelism and numerical growth and organising, and we'll spend at least a couple of episodes on it. But Andy, just to whet our appetites, could you tell us a story?
And it's quite a long story, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. But it starts with a conversion. I can remember the day that the church council and I, when I was a vicar, were converted. Because we had a visit from Martin Wood, who was a parish development advisor. And he came to our PCC meeting and asked, what is your vision for the parish? And we gave him lots of answers about growing and doing more children's work and having a youth group and all of that stuff. And he listened patiently and politely, and at the end said, no, I don't think you have a vision for the parish at all. It sounds to me like all you've got is a vision for your church. And we all realized he was absolutely right. And we had to rethink the way that we operated in a way that was about the parish as well as about the congregation. So we did a listening campaign. We asked the people of the parish what concerns they had. We didn't promise we will meet your needs. That wasn't the point. We said, if we know what the things that are on your heart are, then we will work with partners in order to find what the solutions are with you, not for you. And as part of that listening campaign, I went to see C. C was not a churchgoer, but she was from a fantastic matriarchal Caribbean heritage. And she was the person on the estate that people went to if they had problems. She was the best networked person in the community. And so I was talking to her and listening to her. And her daughter was there. Her daughter, Africa, was at that point 14 years old and was also not a churchgoer, but starting to get interested in all this thing. So unknown to me, and to be honest, the safeguarding implications are horrendous, so I probably would have stopped her if I'd known, but unknown to me, Africa went door to door around every house on her estate, and she said, so the church doesn't know what this community is interested in and cares about, and they want to ask you. So tell me, and she noted it down on a piece of paper, door by door by door. She didn't have a questionnaire, she had conversations. She had, to be exact, about 55 conversations, I think it was, and more than anyone else in the church was having, but between us, we covered, I don't know, several hundred households. Now, the result of that, there were some internal results and some external results. Internally, well, I got all the results in, and I asked a member of the congregation if he would put it on a spreadsheet for me. And he phoned me that evening with two pieces of news. The first was that most of the people on that estate were concerned about unmanageable debt and access to benefits. And the second thing that he told me was that he had, therefore, having done the spreadsheet, that afternoon taken early retirement from his job as a bank manager in order to work with the community to help them to solve their issues. And then externally, what happened as a result of that was people started to get interested. They started to join with us. So there was Robert. Now, Robert was standing to be a local councillor, and he was feeling like he needed to get to know the concerns of the community. And oddly, he discovered that the church was the organisation that was most interested in doing it. So he said, could he come to church? He understood that there might be a faith commitment at some stage, and he was interested in that in due course, but for the moment, could he just join? And he joined, and he refound a faith, and he was prepared and got confirmed, and is now a member of a sort of new monastic community thing. And other people started coming to me. They said, oh, that there's this girl who came to our doors. Oh yeah, that'll be Africa. Yeah. And we asked her about church and could we come? And she said, well, I don't go, but I don't think they mind people just turning up. So really, and people started turning up. They said, Africa sent us. Well, she didn't really send us, but she told us we could come and we'd be welcome. So we found them joining the congregation. And next door to see an Africa, literally her next door neighbor, was someone who did have a faith in Jesus, but had become a little bit disillusioned with the particular church setting she was in that didn't seem as interested in the community. And she started attending that church and, well, cutting a very long story rather short, she's getting ordained as a priest this autumn. We found that by aiming to care for the parish and work with them, not for them, that was the way that the numerical growth started following. And there are reports out there and statistics that suggest that's not an unusual circumstance. Archdeacon Elizabeth, what's your experience?
Well, it's really interesting that this question comes from Pete Rogers from Nottingham. I was at one time a priest in the Diocese of Sutherland Nottingham, and in the early days of Nottingham Citizens, a group of us focused on Anglican community organising, raising funds for a community organiser to work with us. What community organising does is it allows the training of individuals within their organisation and therefore within their local parish church to be able to train, to grow, and to consider a particular way of working. And there are certain aspects of that working which I guess that Andy and Caroline have been talking about over their sessions, but training individuals, for example, to have one-to-one conversations, of training individuals to be able to really listen to what others are saying, to be able to represent those views, to be able to grow in their own leadership as they take on public action around some of those issues. And all of that begins to strengthen not only a network of organisations, but actually the church that's involved. And so you can actually develop a system where you have individuals, not necessarily the traditional people who hold positions within a church like the vicar, like the church wardens, but actually other individuals who hold leadership, perhaps for a particular time or a particular season when you're engaged in one particular action. And having that sort of growth of leadership, having that focus on public action, having that focus on being able to listen, actually strengthens your local church. And in strengthening, it enables it to engage with its wider community in a very different way. So, yeah, I see it as a key way in which you can strengthen any institution, but particularly the parish church.
Excellent. Thank you. Now, our next two questions are on similar themes, so I think we can take them together. Mm-hmm. Bethany asks, does COVID-19 suggest we should be campaigning for better treatment of animals for the sake of human health, if for no other reason? And Nick asks, how does all this relate to environmental concerns? Seems like your 5 steps will end up with something that's good for people, which is great, but not necessarily for plants and animals. Caroline, would you like to start?
Certainly, I'll start. I mean, the first thing I would say is that I think we should be campaigning for better treatment of animals just because we should be campaigning for better treatment of animals. Although I agree that the current situation has shown us there may well be something in it for us. And I think that community organising recognises the universal truth, which is that we are all connected. And that doesn't just mean people. And that the things we do, we don't do them without consequence. There are always consequences and ripples to the things that we do. And we need to understand those consequences, not only for our fellow human beings and what it feels like to be them in the world in which we inhabit, but also those consequences for our environment and our animal life. So yes, I think that we should be campaigning for those things, and also because people care about those things. We care about those things. And one of the things about community organising is it is a fairly ruthless model, because it's about people and their self-interest and their passions. You can only get a campaign off the ground, really, if you have enough people around you who care about that thing. Otherwise, it's incredibly exhausting to attempt to do anything. And I'm sure we've all sat at meetings where we really don't care about the content or the outcome. And I imagine those meetings did not get the best from us and from our participation. But I think there is a recognition, those of us who've cared about animals and the environment for a long time, it's actually coming as something of a relief to us that the general population are beginning to share those concerns in a more informed way. And one of the things I'm involved with at the moment, which is an offshoot from my community organising, is that we've been talking about what we do in a pandemic as Extinction Rebellion. So what can we do in a pandemic? Well, one of the things that we can do is we can actually encourage people to re-engage with nature, and we can look at encouraging people to grow their own food. So I've put a bid together for some grant money to encourage low-income families to grow food sustainably, because that's one of the groups that I've been in conversation with. I've been in conversation with environmental groups. I've been in conversation as well with my fellow volunteers at Food Bank, who are concerned about the flow of fresh food into low-income families. I've been in conversation with teachers who are worried about children at home who've not got access to green space and who would normally be growing things in a school garden, and they aren't able to have that experience this year. So from a whole lot of one-to-one conversations has come this idea of supplying low-income families and families who struggle with the means of production to grow their own vegetables. And the first challenge that we came up against was that some of our conversation partners live in flats and don't have access to a green space that they can use. So we've basically tiered this project to those who've only got an indoor living space, those who've got a bit of outdoor space but no soil, and those who've actually got a garden. And then thinking a bit wider about what we might be able to do about brownfield spaces. So I think the environmental concerns naturally come out of the conversations that we have, but there are some of us who consciously bring them in at every turn. So I think we should be campaigning for better treatment of animals and better treatment of the environment. And that is something that a lot of citizens chapters are doing.
And it occurs to me that all three of us are on the Chelmsford Diocesan Environmental Group. Archdeacon Elizabeth, as it happens, you chair that group. So do you see links between community organising and environmental concern?
Yeah, could I answer the first question first before I answer that one? Because I think there is something just to be said about our attitude to animals. And one of the reports that has come out around COVID is actually focused on the wet markets in China and the trade in wildlife in sort of Asia. But we also have a huge trade in this country in exotic species. In 2015, the government in the House of Commons debated the exotic pet trade. And some of the data that was put in that debate is quite concerning. So, for example, the UK alone imports 40 million pet fish annually. That's both marine and freshwater. And almost all die prematurely within a year. That's shocking. The other thing is that, I mean, scientists know that there are at least 70 pet-linked human diseases, which means that we are actually harbouring risk to our own species in this country, as well as the human population, just by our trade and our desire to have exotic pets. Some of those, for example, could wipe out poultry. There's a degenerative illness called heartwater that could wipe out all cattle farming in this country. So these are really big issues. They impact wildlife, they impact us, and actually COVID has actually perhaps shone a little light on it. But we mustn't let ourselves here in Britain off the hook on this. It isn't just elsewhere in the world that is a problem, it's also an issue here. So what about community organising and the environment? Well, actually, models of different environmental groups have similarities with community organising. Caroline's just mentioned Extinction Rebellion. The Christian wing of that has just produced a document along with Ruth Valerio from Tier Fund, which actually looks at how we can organise ourselves. Extinction Rebellion's model, with lots of little local chapters, in many ways is a little bit like community organising. And it's as we listen to different people's perspectives and think, well, what is it we can do to try and raise awareness and actually think how we might do things differently. And at this particular time, as we're in lockdown and thinking what life might be like, it's a really good opportunity for us to be listening to all those voices and thinking, well, what should we be saying about how we should do things differently in the future? So, for example, in this country, we've got so used to getting on a plane and flying to our chosen destination for a holiday. We don't even think about it. We think we are entitled to that because of the pressure of our lives. But actually, now's a really good time for us to think, this isn't sustainable. What should we be doing instead? So this is a key moment really for us to think about how we could use community organising, our citizens groups across Essex and much wider afield to focus on how can we link this to our environmental concerns.
Thank you. Caroline, I believe you got a poem for us.
I do usually have a poem, and actually this particular one isn't one of mine, but it's an Evelyn Underhill poem, and I first encountered this on the wall at the retreat centre in Pleshy, and it particularly spoke to me as somebody who's had a lifelong concern for the environment and a lifelong love of animals and all creatures. I was that child that fished worms out of puddles and rescued spiders, and so it really appealed to me. But actually it also appeals to a wider biblical principle, because in the Bible we are told, or we have the voice that says to us, you have been faithful in small things, I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness, is said to the faithful servant who does good with what's given to him. And sometimes I think that we don't think enough about the fact that the way we treat the world and the way we treat things that are smaller and have less power than us is being watched very closely by God, who is much larger and more powerful than us. And so I think modelling down into creation what has been poured out on us in the love of God is a part of our vocation. And if we neglect it, then we are neglecting something that's the first task we were given. We were told to tend and keep creation, and that is the first task, our first duty, as it were, before all these other jobs and roles that we give ourselves. So this poem's called The Little Things. I come in the little things, saith the Lord, not borne on morning wings of majesty, but I have set my feet amidst the delicate and bladed wheat that springs triumphant in the furrowed sod. There do I dwell, in weakness and in power, not broken or divided, saith our God. In your straight garden plot I come to flower. About your porch my vine, meek, fruitful, doth entwine, waits at the threshold, love's appointed hour. I come in the little things, saith the Lord, yea, on the glancing wings of eager birds, the softly pattering feet of furred and gentle beasts. I come to meet your hard and wayward heart in brown, bright eyes that peep out from the break. I stand confessed. On every nest, where feathery patience is content to brood and leaves her pleasure for the high emprise of motherhood, there doth my Godhead rest. I come in the little things, saith the Lord. My starry wings I do forsake, love's highway of humility to take. Meekly I fit my stature to your need. In beggar's part about your gates I shall not cease to plead, as man to speak with man, till by such art I shall achieve my immemorial plan, pass the low lintel of the human heart.
Thank you. And our final question is from Nick, and he asks, you talk about Barack Obama, but he's kind of retired. Who are the present leaders and online resources, other than the two of you, he says, who are talking about community organising for faith community and 50-50 vicars? I should explain that Nick has picked up a term we've used earlier in this series of podcasts, the idea of 50-50 ministry, that vicars and other forms of Christian leaders need to be spending as much time externally on building alliances for the common good and on evangelism and so on, as they spend internally on congregational development. So Nick's asking us about resources. Caroline, who are the go-to resources for you?
So actually, I know that later on we're going to talk about some very well-known folks, but actually for me, the primary go-to resource is the people who are doing it, who are muddling on alongside me, some of whom are aware they're doing community organising, and some of whom are not aware consciously or wouldn't label it that, but are just the people who are super connected in their communities and who are actually getting on with things. So I'm looking, for example, particularly at the moment, I'm looking at the good practice of some people online who, for example, will run a voluntary organisation, and every time somebody comments on one of their posts on their Facebook page, they'll put a little comment back just saying thank you, or thank you for donating, or thank you for your generosity, or thank you for your question, the answer is this. And being just really responsive, because a lot of organisations broadcast, but actually not a lot of organisations create that kind of dialogue that builds relationship, that then builds community engagement. And a lot of what we're doing at Culture to Food Bank at the moment is trying to build that kind of two-way engagement. So watching which of our volunteers are really great at that, who really build relationships and connections with people. So I think the people who are doing it, who are making it work, and that's not always vicars. Often it's the people in the second or the third chair in terms of church hierarchy structure, not that it really works like that. But the people who naturally, if the church was not in lockdown, would be the ones everybody would tell if something goes wrong, or if there's a need, or if there's something to celebrate, who know everybody's birthdays, those people. So they are my go-to resources online too, because that personality that they have then spills over into their online interactions. And also my go-to resource for online church as such is Disability in Jesus, is people like Katie Tupling, who have been doing it for a really, really, really long time and doing it really well for a really long time. And actually, they've written a book about it long before it became a thing for mainstream church. And then there are leaders across the world who have a kind of international connecting ministry. And I'm not talking about the big names you'd see headlining at Spring Harvest or, New Wine or Greenbelt, but just people who are getting on with it, who have actually a huge footprint online, even though you wouldn't necessarily have heard of their names. So I think I want to give a shout out to people you won't have heard of, but go online and look for who's doing it well and who's got good practice, and keep your mind open. And don't just look for people who've got, the blue tick validated accounts because they're famous people. Oh, I think my sound's playing up. Whoa. So I have furry interaction. The brown, furry-eyed, brown-eyed creatures are attacking me. Bear with me. Yes, go on. Good boy. Good boy. It's all right. Good boy. Yes.
Always good to have extra participants on this.
My feet are being licked. It tickles.
Excellent. Well, Caroline is being attacked. My go-to place to start is a book called People of Power by Angus Ritchie, published by Centre for Theology and Community in London, 2018. If I was a vicar, and my guess is that, I'm not a vicar right now because I'm an adult educator, but maybe I'll be a vicar one day again. If that happened, I would give every person in the congregation a copy of People of Power. You may think that's a really generous thing for me to say. It's not actually massively generous because it's available for free from the Centre for Theology and Community. And you can even get it for free online at the moment. You just go to www.theology-centre.org.uk and look at the resources page there. Archdeacon Elizabeth, what's your recommendation?
Well, can I echo your recommendation, because I think that's a really good recommendation. There is a book that was written in 2009 called The Relational Manager by Michael Schluter and David John Lee. That's been quite foundational in my own approach to working with others and the significance of building relationships in all sorts of contexts. There is also a American Lutheran pastor called John Heinemeier, who's done some interesting work around planned, sustainable leadership and developing leaders through public action and underpinning that with the theology of public action. You can find his resources on the internet, but he's got some really interesting things to say about how we might approach it.
Well, thank you so much for listening to episode 8 of this series of podcasts.
And can I just give a shout out now that I've managed to find it? The dogs disabled my laptop with all my little links that I had ready to share, and I've just re-enabled it. For Disability and Jesus, all one word, all lowercase, .org.uk. So that is somewhere well worth visiting in terms of resources online for the current pandemic and also for the church for always.
Absolutely. Well, you can get in touch with us. I'm at randomlyandy@live.com.
And I'm at revcarolinebeckett@gmail.com. And Andy and I will be back next time, and we'll be talking about planning and power. But we'd like to thank Archdeacon Elizabeth for joining us today. And we have been at a distance rethinking
Christian leadership
with added dog.